I think pace is so important, so clarity, like kind of plus the energy. I think clarity in your communication and what your expectations are, so everybody's on that journey, so you're not leaving people behind. So I think clarity is so important in a leadership role.
Welcome to our Start Inspiring Velocity series. I'm Annie, Growth Partner, and we're welcomed today by Kelly, Wakeman founder, and our very special guest today, MD Josie from BSS. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 23 years across the business you've worked there?
Yes, it is 23 years across Travis Perkins Group. 16 of my early years were in BSS, kind of went off into the wider group, some various roles, and back 9 months ago as MD of BSS. So
amazing. So you may have heard on some of our podcasts where Kelly and I have talked about many different themes that impact organisations, really, whether it's external or internal trends. But one of the pieces that we're so delighted you're here to talk about today is really on leadership in your organisation. Now, I can imagine after 23 years, there are so many different nuggets of perhaps observation, inspiration, and reflection that you've perhaps gone through yourself or for those leaders around you. It's a delight for you to be able to share that with us today. Is there anything for you that stands out over the last sort of few years? And I know this particular role you've been in just under a year, is that right?
Yeah, just under.
Yeah, so what were some of your observations that you noticed, perhaps going from what you were doing before to what you're doing now?
I think definitely I just carry that through, that it's all about the people, and actually inspiring people, creating a vision. I think visible leadership is so important to me, and I think that would have been from the previous MD roles I did within group, but certainly coming back into BSS, somebody that understands the business, is willing to listen to colleagues, and take on board their thoughts and comments about the business as well. So you'd like to think you can come in and you've got all the answers, but many of the answers normally sit within the business, but they're just not being heard. So I think people play such a big part in any leadership role.
And so was that a challenge for you, or was it something, I guess, through your previous experience of other MD roles that you were able to bring to the table with that insight and almost have a bit more of a pause, a step back in this particular role with your leadership style that you've got?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a challenge when I first came back. I think there was a familiarity to me coming back into the business. So, I said I spent 16 years of my early career within BSS and worked my way from internal sales right through to regional director when I went off into the group. So I was well known across the business, and a lot of those colleagues are still within the business today. Wow. What I think helped was because I'd been off into the wider business, spent time in different roles, grown as a person, learned a lot about my own leadership style as well as what colleagues are looking for as well. I think it enabled me to come back in, I suppose, into that elevated position as MD. But I'm not really that hierarchical MD. I say I'm very much a visible leader, but one that will create a vision for colleagues.
Kelly and I were talking earlier in a previous podcast where we were talking about the difference that we sometimes see in, I guess, the description around management and leadership, whether it's leaders thinking that they're leaders when they're actually managers, or managers wanting to have aspirational leaders around them but not finding that they've actually got that. And one of the points Kelly said earlier, is that you can actually have some fantastic leaders in your organisation, but actually the environment doesn't allow them to actually be able to blossom. It's not ready for them. And so that was one of the things you mentioned earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge whether your purpose is to be a manager or your purpose is to be a leader. And sometimes we talked about, you've got a number of roles that are actually player managers, aren't they? So they've kind of got to do a bit of both, and being really intentional about that, because whilst I think everybody can be a leader, actually, to your point, there's a number of people across a whole organisation that can lead change, lead an event, lead something. When you're really talking about senior leadership, that's we were talking at lunch, quite a privilege, but also quite a responsibility, and making sure that you're being really intentional about that and you're doing the right thing. And to the things you were talking about, really creating clarity so that people know what's expected of them and how they can succeed in service of the bigger piece.
Yeah, I think that piece around accountability for me and empowerment is really big in leadership. So I think, you know, creating space where you can empower people to grow within your organisation, and not managing or micromanaging people is really important for me as a leader. You know, I want to create an environment where people feel they can grow, they've got a career in the business. Whereas I think sometimes when, you know, and I've seen it time after time across our business, we put people into leadership roles, but they've not made that transition from management into leadership, and it's just not worked. And that's no fault of theirs. I think, you know, we've promoted people before their time, or, you know, they've shown or displayed some kind of elements of greatness, but actually probably not the true leadership that we're looking for in some of the most senior roles. So I think it's a really fine balance sometimes.
And what do you do in that situation when someone's got the aspiration there but they're not quite ready? How do you work with that in your organisation?
So I think my first place is understand how we've got into the situation we are at the moment. So you know, what am I expecting of that role, and being really clear on, okay, this is what we've got at the moment, this is the situation we're in, but being really clear in terms of my expectations of the role and the leadership position and what I'm looking for that leadership position to be. And then I think, you know, to work with them to try and support them, so whether that's through coaching externally and business coaches, whether it's through internal mentors and trying to help them in that way, or sometimes it's just a really honest and open conversation of, is this actually for you? Because I think when you find people in that situation, there's a lot of times where they're not enjoying it themselves because they've not found their rhythm and their flow. So, you know, they're not enjoying that role themselves, or they've not quite, you know, kind of merged themselves into the new role. And it's almost like a weight off their shoulders to go, oh, wow, somebody's seen I'm probably struggling a little bit here. And sometimes we can turn them into great leaders. So they might have the essence of what we need, or the recipe and the ingredients, but haven't just quite pulled it together as the recipe. And there's just been a few bits missing. So actually giving them those tools, mentoring and I'll say coaching, can sometimes really help.
So in your career, I mean, you must have come across some pretty inspirational leaders. Kelly and I, funnily enough, were talking about dysfunctional leaders earlier, because we always sort of have these wonderful adjectives that we use to describe great leadership, but actually it's often the dysfunctional ones that we notice first. But for you, you know, there might be someone that comes to mind, but over the last few years, is there someone that stands out for you where you thought, you know, I remember that conversation, I remember that person, it changed me, it was a changer in how I viewed a situation, or how I thought about a situation, or perhaps how you led yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So God, it would have been in my earlier days. I think I was going into or got aspirations to be a regional director at the time, and there was two gentlemen that I was working alongside. So one was our HR director, a guy called John, and there was another one called Tom, who was our sales and operations director. And I got invited along to a development centre. There was no actual job at the end of it, but there was a restructure planned later down, which we weren't aware of. So I managed to go along to this, or be invited along to this assessment centre, and I'd purposely asked to be put in front of Tom because I didn't know him and he didn't know me. So I thought, actually, if I'm really going to showcase myself here, I need to kind of like broaden my network. And John had given me some really great feedback before I'd gone into that about I'd got quite a black or white style previously, so it was kind of either yes or no. There was no in between, no grey bits. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you know, what do you mean? No, I'm not. You know, almost kind of I'm straight there in that moment. Yeah. And John worked with me for quite a while actually on that leadership and my style, and being able to listen and to take feedback without being defensive. And kind of grow into that, which I think was a bit of a pivotal moment in my career of that change in listening to feedback. And I now massively believe that feedback is a real gift.
Yeah. And one of the things we were saying earlier, actually, we were talking about was it sounds so simple, but often not executed very well, which is the ability to listen really well, you know, to listen with the intention to hear and understand, not reply. And Kelly, one of the points you made earlier was around, you know, that moment that you have, you know, we used a formula, event plus response equals outcome. You know, how we choose to respond is often influential of that outcome.
I actually think that step from manager to leader is the most difficult, because you think what's made you famous as a manager is having the answers, you know, moving at speed, executing what's already been decided. When you move into the leadership realm, it's much more about listening, seeking to understand, being curious, maybe being okay with not having the answers, or even having the wrong answer and someone else kind of influencing you differently. Because like you say, the rest of the organisation have different view of what's going on, and you might not have all of the picture, and being open enough and confident enough to know that you don't have to have all those answers. It's a very different skill set. And quite often, some of the businesses we work with, they've promoted people to leader without any training or coaching or mentoring, and expecting by osmosis that that person can do what is a different job, completely different job.
I think certainly in the industry I work in as well, that management title is very synonymous with our branches, so branch managers, and that team is very close, and you can almost make things happen immediately. You go into a warehouse, something's not there, right, can you pick that up for me, can you do that, can you move that? Moving into a leadership position is usually a remote working environment. Your team are not there on hand every day. I think you have to trust in the conversation and the chat that you've had in that branch or in an environment, in a meeting, and then you go away and got to trust in those colleagues then. And this is when I talk about empowerment, that you kind of have a meeting, you all set the goal, you set the vision, and off we all go to deliver. You've got to trust in those colleagues to go and be able to deliver that for you as a leader. Whereas a manager, I think you're very much on top of that, and it's almost that bit easier. So actually inspiring people to want to go off and deliver on what the ask is, I think is the difference for me as well.
What would you say is the best piece of business advice that you've been given?
I think, again, probably one of my previous managers, I've taken a lot over my career from people that I've worked for, good, bad, indifferent, the things I leave behind, the things I take with me. But I think always be true to yourself. And if your gut is telling you something, then you're usually not far wrong with your gut. You can back it up with other stuff, but you're usually not far wrong. And I think the other thing is worry about the controllables rather than things you can't control, because I think you can spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes on things that you can't control, where actually think about the things that you can control and that you can deliver on, rather than worrying about the things that actually are out of your realm, kind of thing.
And I think if I play that back to trusting your gut, focusing on things that only you can control, your leadership style now, so you talk about a former manager, or former boss giving you that feedback, giving you that critical piece of advice. What would your leadership advice be now to yourself? I was asked this a couple of months ago, and I suppose it really took me back, because actually you say some of the things that you found, the good, the bad over the years, actually it's what you learn and take forward. But I was really interested to hear, what would your advice be back to yourself?
I think probably in my earlier days I was very driven, very, very judgmental. And as I said, people give me feedback and I'm probably, oh yeah, okay, that's what you think. I know it all. I probably would have taken that step back earlier. I've been fortunate enough over my career to have development, had to have coaches, have really made me kind of look at myself. So I think if I was looking at myself like 15, 20 years ago, I'd probably be saying to myself, Josie, just take a step back, like let's assess the situation here, and let's think about what those people are saying out there. It should matter. And it's a reflection of my leadership of taking that into consideration of how people are looking at me and how I'm coming across. Whereas I'd probably at one point I'd walk into a room, I'm full of life, I'm a glass half full kind of woman, and I'd have walked in there and the quiet person in the corner I'd have probably almost dismissed. Whereas now I kind of make sure that I'm scanning that room, that I make sure that I'm including that person around the board table to say Jane, what's your opinion on this? Or trying to include everybody around that table. Whereas at one point I'd have been my voice heard over that table. So step back, really assess the situation, and just give yourself time.
Such a powerful piece of advice, and almost at Start Inspiring we talk an awful lot on our podcast about being the best version of ourselves, but one, we're always learning, and secondly, we should be with our clients always listening. And it's so fantastic to hear that from you, not just what you've learned, but what you're almost taking forward, because that's not just the people around you, that's the end user as well. And what a wonderful inspiration to the people that you're leading in your organisation.
At Start Inspiring, we've been working on what we call the velocity model, where after our 5 years of consulting and too many decades of working in leadership roles, we've come to a simple formula for businesses that say if you've got clarity and you times that by energy, you will have velocity in your business. And what we mean by that is everybody moving at pace in the same direction. What's your thoughts on that as a formula and concept?
I think pace is so important. So clarity, like kind of plus the energy. I think clarity in your communication and what your expectations are. So everybody's on that journey. So you're not leaving people behind. So I think clarity is so important in a leadership role. And I think the energy, creating that pace and creating an environment where people want to move at pace, because if let's be honest, if you don't move at pace, you'll get left behind.
Absolutely.
So since I've come back into the business 9 months in, it's all been about clarity and pace for us. So I think it's a great concept.
What is your best book you've read and why?
So you would think this would probably be a book around leadership, but it's absolutely not. So reading for me is absolutely getting me out of the zone and chilling out and something. So a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine is Sophie Kinsella. I think she's a great author. And there's a book called Undomestic Goddess, and it actually reminds me of myself a little bit. So it was about a high-performing lawyer, and she was just work, and it led to a really bad decision. So there's quite a bit of humour in the book as well. It's not too serious, but she takes herself away out of the day job and goes into the countryside. So it was all about balance and balance in life. So it resonated with me quite a lot. And it's one that I kind of come back to sometimes when I'm kind of think my balance is out of kilter, of kind of coming back to that book. So yeah, definitely a bit of a guilty pleasure books are for me, just to kind of take me away from the day job and just go into a world of nonsense, really.
Do you know what? I would never have thought that would be the answer. So we find so much about our guests on this. What do you love most about what you do? Obviously, being in your role around 9 months, as you mentioned earlier, but what gets you up in the morning? What do you love most?
There's two real big things for me, and the first one would be it's inspiring people, but watching people grow. And I'm really fortunate to have had 23 years career in this business, and I've helped so many people along the way develop their careers. And when I look back, I feel so immensely proud of that time and effort that I've managed to put into people to help them develop on their journey and just point them in the right direction sometimes. So people development is absolutely one of them, and then the other side is the customer bit for me. I just love being in front of customers. I love the relationships in this industry. I love the excitement of the actual industry itself and our projects and things. So both probably centered around people, but yeah, people development and our customers would definitely be two that are up there.
A real passion in what you do, and as you mentioned, no doubt inspiring to those. And it would be interesting to have some of the people that you've given advice to over the years, and how they've taken that on board, because I think often as leaders, and especially with the career that you've had, the impact that you have had, you're seeing it just as the conversation, but imagine the ripples, of what you've done and how you may have changed that trajectory for those people as well. So
I think that's something sometimes that I don't give myself probably enough credit for. So the impact that I have on people, I kind of walk into a room and I'm just me, MD or what, I'm just me, I'm just Josie, and I'm the same Josie at home as I am at work, okay, albeit a different there's a different task at hand when you come into work than what's at home, but I'm still the same person. So I think I underestimate the impact as walking in there. They see an MD walking in, I feel just Josie walking in. So it's a real fine balance to kind of get that right, to make sure that, again, that they're not feeling intimidated in that situation.
The green shoots I'm seeing is in the independence and the autonomy of the team. So I think coming into the business, really setting that foundation, that stability and the direction and the clarity behind there, it's wonderful to be able to see that. It really is.
Welcome back to the Start Inspiring podcast series. It's a delight to welcome a very special guest today, Rob Stewart from BSS, Commercial Director, 9 months in. Now it's a slightly different edge today, because these two wonderful guests on the sofa have previously worked together. So, although our theme today is around our leadership insights and really some of the experiences and observations, Rob, that you've had over your journey, perhaps in this role or previous roles, I'm also really interested to hear some of those collaborative insights as well, of when you've worked together and possibly learnt from each other as well. So, do you want to just tell the listeners then, how do you two know each other?
Well, if I start, so I'd have been mid-20s, I guess. Yeah, maybe. Often said in short trousers. So I was just going into maybe my first management job, I think. So I was out on the road with a business, went into management, leading people, and went on an internally created leadership development program, which, Kelly, I think that was kind of part of your doing, really. So I guess the relationship started there, working through my leadership journey, and then as I've moved from business to business, and I guess with yourself starting Inspiring as well, we've maintained contact and had a coaching relationship, and obviously more business to business now as well.
Yeah. So you were, first role, I was HR director at the time, wasn't I?
Yes.
So so we would have done some succession planning and some talent management. You were one of them. But it's really lovely how our relationship has then continued beyond that business, and the different relationships that we've had at time, right? So at times we've been beside each other in a leadership team.
Yep.
Other times I've been your coach. Other times I've been in helping you as part of the exec team you were in, and kind of creating high performance as a collective. And then we continue to support each other personally and professionally, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Rob, tell me why leadership is so important in your role.
For me, it's a personal journey. I always remember going into that first role in the business that we were alluding to there, and I had some fantastic managers, some fantastic leaders who really helped me with my journey. I had ambition, but was young, was keen and eager to move on, and having really supportive leaders, supportive people around me who gave me that opportunity, gave me that coaching. I understand what it meant for me, and being able to give that back, kind of having grown up through a career in sales, moving more into leadership, it lands with me as more a vocation, being able to deliver back. And we were talking earlier, Kelly, with regards to some of the people who I've been able to support and develop or be part of their own development, because it's people who have really stepped up and into that. It's a different perspective on business. It's something that gives me great fulfillment on a daily basis. I understand it sounds quite cliched, but being able to give that back, because I know what it's meant to me earlier in my career and even my career today, it's such a powerful thing to be able to do.
I think having been there yourself and almost going through that journey, that coaching journey, that, let's be honest, we don't often know what that looks like. Often we don't know what we don't know. So tell me then, so Kelly previously was your coach. What was it about the coaching that you had from Kelly? Because obviously what you're doing now is you're imparting that knowledge to others. So you're kind of that gift is going forwards. But what was it, or do you remember in a series of those sessions that resonated with you to go, oh yeah, this is what I need to be doing more of?
I think one of the biggest developments for me, and one of the biggest journeys that we went through, was being able to get out my own way, stopping that self-doubt. We worked through the Positive Intelligence programme, and I remember speaking to you at the time, Kelly. That was life-changing for me, and it's still something I go back to. Some of the habits that were formed at that point genuinely have changed my life for the better, and it's things that I still impart to others, and it's something that I recommend to other people, very cautiously in terms of those conversations. But as I say, understanding the saboteurs, how that affects me and how that affects how I turn up at work and how I can support others, was been a huge part for me. Wow,
I mean, that is such a powerful response, and I think sometimes we've talked previously in other podcasts about what we're trying to do is, one, better ourselves, but also not stand still in understanding just not what we're doing for other people, but how they're sharing that with those around them. So tell me some of the differences then that you see from other people with your leadership style now, having been from where you've come from and where you are now. Do you see that in other people? Do you see what you're leading and your inspiration, I guess, kind of rubbing off from those around you and them taking that that leadership leap?
I think it's very situational. It depends on the individual. It depends on the situation that we're in. I think understanding the individual, understanding the situation. I think one of the things that's really changed for me is that looking to understand rather be understood. I think having that kind of insight, really pressure testing in and around and understanding a wider context from the individual perspective in the situation, that helps me adapt my style to actually get into the nooks of the issue with the individual, what they're trying to achieve, the problems that they're facing into, or how they're looking to manage and lead with their teams as well. I think just taking that pause, reflecting and just trying to put myself in their shoes but also see it externally just gives a much broader perspective on some of the challenges and issues and lets me adapt my style to support them.
And also the ability to adapt. You know, so many leaders that actually call themselves leaders are managers with some leadership traits that only work in certain situations. To be able to step back, observe what could work better, or almost have a sort of 360 of, okay, what's going to work in this environment, you know, in this sector, in this within this team, that I need to be mindful of before I start with what my preference or leadership style would be. Was that one of the areas that you would say you worked on, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm just humbled by the because actually that's what I get to do in my job every day is help brilliant aspirational people be their best. And I would say the best thing about working with you is your desire to be the best version of leadership for your team. You work incredibly hard at that, and as a coach, as a performance coach, I mean, let's face it, I can work with anybody, but it's much more enjoyable and a privilege to work with people who want to be different, are willing to hear the tough stuff, willing to work on the tough stuff, and then to hear that then ripples beyond the individual that I'm working with or beyond the team that I'm working with. That's why we do this, and you go on and give the gift. And I've seen you transform over those years as well. And you know, when you talk about stopping and really understanding and understanding yourself as well as those that you effectively serve, is really good. And I think there's a wisdom in there that will be great for the next bit.
Good.
I think what's lovely about when you're under a year in an organisation, there's that momentum, enthusiasm, experience and intuition you bring to the table. But what I always see when it's around a year with people, their blinkers are off. They're so much more receptive sometimes. What did you see going into BSS, you know, that you wanted to see more of, or you wanted to drive with leadership more of, that perhaps you felt that was your way of inspiring others? Because obviously 9 months in, where you are now and where you were when you started perhaps is slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first observations I made, and indeed feedback from the team when I first came into the business and speaking to them, the team had been through a lot of change. That psychological safety had been, I wouldn't say eroded over time, but there'd just been so much change that people didn't know what direction to kind of follow in. I think being able to very quickly understand the business, understand the individuals, see the real strengths that were in the team, see the real strength behind the organisation. It's a phenomenal organisation, over 125 years old. There's some real heritage that sits within there. Being very mindful, very respectful of that, mindful and respectful of the individuals, and turning up as the situational leader that they need for the challenge that was being faced. I think being able to balance those things, to very quickly come up with a plan, create some structure, give people that common sense of purpose, and really start to rebuild the team in what is a very turbulent market that we're all facing. For me, getting the feedback that they're starting to see that, starting to feel that in such a short period of time is wonderful to hear. It's really good. We've
talked previously in our podcast around almost going slow to go fast. And it sounds like, you know, you went slow to go fast in the beginning to gain clarity, to gain and build trust, but also have the capacity to build that velocity, to build that momentum in areas that you knew were ready. But also conversely, when, quite rightly so, when people have been through a lot of change or uncertainty, what they need is stability, and what they need is the clarity, it sounds like, that you gave them. And that must have played a massive part in almost an element to be able to step back, to go in almost giving perfect foundations of what was needed in the beginning, in order to then build that momentum as to where you are now. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like a lot's happened in 9 months. We've obviously spoken to
Mm-hmm.
Josie as well, and there's some phenomenal progress, lots of green shoots. So just share with us where you are now and 9 months in, and where you plan to be.
Great question. I think the green shoots I'm seeing is in the independence and the autonomy of the team. So I think coming into the business, really setting that foundation, that stability and the direction and the clarity behind there, seeing how the team are taking that on board and really empowered to go out and make decisions.
Yes.
They're starting to do things which I could never have dreamed of in terms of the overall performances. There's a couple of key projects that the team are working through now, where every time they come back to us, we're absolutely delighted being able to give the team the opportunity to sit in front of Josie, in front of the rest of the SLT, and just be proud in what they've achieved, knowing that they've done it, they've driven it. From my perspective, I've given them a platform to stand there, but they've done it for themselves. It's wonderful to be able to see that. It really is.
Do you know, I can feel the energy, the excitement, so that's great. Well done, you.
Okay, best piece of business advice you've been given?
Always turn up with a smile. I think it's a really simple bit of advice, and on the surface it's quite simple and can be almost lack authenticity. Actually understanding it in more detail, it's turning up with a positive attitude. There will be challenges, there will be obstacles to overcome, but that mindset piece is hugely important. Having that smile, seeing that the positive in how can we turn whatever situation we're facing into a real positive is huge.
Favourite book?
Favourite book? I think, without sounding like the W.H. Smith's business books, which I think you probably get quite easy on this bit, for me it's absolutely situational. Depending on where I started with the chimp paradox. That's great. I think there's some great learnings to take from that. Starting with Why, again, another classic from there. I think more recently for me, Kim Scott's Radical Candor. I think being able to piece those three together is
Did you
really
tell him
important.
to say that? That's
No.
one of your favourites.
You did recommend
It's
it
one of my
though.
favourites,
You did
yeah.
recommend it.
You two
Yeah.
have been conversing, I'm sure. Brilliant.
Favourite podcast?
Oh, start inspiring. It's got to be. It's got to be.
Kelly, are you paying him? Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for listening to the podcast series, The Velocity Effect.